Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Everybody who's been in touch on this migration story, this is the fact that people are turning up for NHS operations. They're turning up at the same time, English speakers and non-English speakers. The non-English speakers are being taken first. A lot of you seem to be quite annoyed about that. I wonder what my panel thinks. Charles Amos is political commentator, as is Jonathan Less, both here in the studio. Charles, what do you make of this story?
Well, I'm not too sure what to make of it, to be quite honest, because I'm very sympathetic to the idea that it's saving the taxpayer money for the various reasons that Imperial College London outline. But then equally...
Well, what are they saying? Just remind us of what they're saying of how it saves money.
Well, they're saying that because they've got the translators booked for a certain amount of time, it makes sense to have all of the people that can't speak English go first.
Because they'd have to pay overtime if they kept them later, and the translators would have to say...
And I think that's a solid case. But then equally well, I can see the people that go, well, there's an injustice here because I'm an Englishman and I've paid in all of my life, and surely I should be the first to see the doctor as opposed to the foreigner that's only come in recently and paid a pittance or something like that. So to be quite honest, I don't really have a set view, but I think there's good arguments on both sides.
Jonathan?
I mean, I think you can extrapolate. There are a lot of people who've lived here a very long time who actually don't speak English, who might need an interpreter, who might not be confident enough to speak English, and that's, you know, you could argue that's a separate issue. And of course, there are most people who come here, I would say, actually do speak decent enough English, you know, because obviously it's very important that you should be able to speak English in this country. But I think that it seems a bit like a cultural story, this one. If we accept the principle that everyone has the right to an interpreter, you know, everyone has the right to medical treatment.
Of course.
I'm not saying that you are questioning that, but if you do accept that premise, then it follows that interpreters have to be paid for, and people will be complaining, certainly the right-wing newspapers would be complaining if the NHS was spending more money, even more money on interpreters who are having to do overtime, etc. So it seems like an acceptable compromise. I don't think there are masses of people using NHS services who require interpreting for the reasons that we just outlined.
Yes,
okay.
I think right-wingers have got to accept that if they want greater fairness as they see it, that will result in the aggregate worse healthcare outcomes insofar as there's greater spending on translators. There is a trade-off there, and they've got to admit that they're willing to accept that or not.
OK, the other main story really about immigration is Robert Jenrick today talking about dozens of terror suspects crossing the channel in small boats, and he says that there have been about 1,000 people who have crossed, of those who have crossed, who are involved in criminality and known to be involved in criminality. And I wonder what you think about this, Jonathan.
I think that it's very dangerous rhetoric for Jenrick to sort of be implying that sort of terrorists or potential terrorists are piling in to our shores. We know that there are dangerous people who have been, you know, sort of who've grown up in Britain their whole lives. It's not this sort of threat coming from outside, so we should sort of...
But it is.
But it's not only...
If there are 1,000 people who are involved in... I mean, if that's a factual thing...
If we're taking his word for it, he said, I think that it's 1,000 people who arrived involved in criminality.
Yeah, that's what I said, yeah.
And of course, as I've said to you before, obviously, if people have a history of violence, for example, then I don't think that they should be liable for immigration in this country. There obviously has to be some kind of rules when you are deciding who should stay in this country, so I completely accept that. In a way, he actually makes the case for the opposition that this is a system that's working, because the reason that he knows that he would have that figure, if that figure is accurate, is that security services were aware of these people and they were put on watch lists. So actually it's not otherwise just a guess. We're just guessing that of a certain number of people there will be a fraction who will be terror suspects. This is something that the security services know about, and they're putting them on watch lists and presumably doing all they can to remove them if there are, you know, safe ways to do so. So I don't really know what Rwanda has to do with any of this. Rwanda was not even, even on its own terms, Rwanda was not a deterrent of any kind, and obviously it was grossly expensive.
There was some evidence that it was deterring people, if you look at how many people were going to the Republic of Ireland, for example.
That I don't think there's enough evidence to conclude that in either direction. But the fact is that it was a grotesque waste of money, and it was only ever going to accommodate 500 people. And we can relitigate these arguments, but I think the Conservatives have to accept that that argument has been lost, and they'll need to think of other ways to deal with this should they ever be fortunate enough to get back into power. But I don't find this kind of intervention at all helpful from Jenrick. And as ever with these things, you have to ask.
Well, he's put. I mean, it may not be helpful, but he's put factual information in the public domain. He was the immigration minister, saying that people are coming in in these boats.
You have to ask who was in charge for the last 14 years while these terrible things were happening. And Jenrick,
that's a perfectly legitimate question.
Jenrick has to take some... If Jenrick is making a complaint about something that's happening in Britain, he has to take responsibility.
And actually, Stephen Wolfe, in fairness, made that point a minute ago when he said, why didn't Jenrick... Well, maybe he did internally, I don't know, but why didn't he start talking about this then? Charles, what do you make of this?
Well, I'm fully willing to accept that there are many terrorists which are coming over in these small boats into Britain. I simply don't see that as sufficient reason to stop these people coming over in the boats. Just as we would all accept that it's unacceptable to stop internal migration from urban into rural areas, that is, from areas with high rates of crime to areas of low rates of crime, I think we've got to accept that just because some migrants are coming and they've got a higher rate of crime in the aggregate, that is not reason to restrict them to coming into Britain. The guilt of some parties isn't reason to restrict the rights of free association of the vast majority of economic migrants that wish to come to this country and to work for employers.
But we're not talking about legal migration, we're talking about illegal migration of people coming across in boats who are not coming.
I don't have a problem with illegal migration.
You don't have a problem with illegal migration?
No, I think individuals should be free to associate with natives if they so wish. If I'm a landlord and I want to rent out to economic migrants and they've come illegally, I think that's my prerogative, that's my right, that's within my freedom. I think economic migrants have every right in the moral realm, and of course the legal system should track the moral realm to come here and work for willing employers. Now, do I think they should get put up in hotels and given benefits? No, I don't.
Okay, so your point is that your belief, sorry, I just want to get to the bottom of this because it's a slightly different set of beliefs than I've come across before. You believe that anybody should be able to come to any country, presumably?
Yes, I'm in favour of totally open borders.
Totally open borders everywhere?
Yeah.
Okay, but you're stemming from that, you think that we shouldn't, as UK taxpayers in this instance anyway, be forced to, put them on processing centres or put them in hotels, give people benefits? Just expand on that a little bit.
Yes, individuals should be free to come to this country, but the taxpayer should not be forced to support those economic migrants. It's perfectly fine for an economic migrant to come to this country and work for a willing employer and to rent from a willing landlord and to make friends with natives, but it's unacceptable for them to accept, and I don't think many of them do accept, that they should be supported by the British taxpayer.
Can I ask you, are you saying that you actually support the boats then? If a migrant, so you're saying it's basically part of the marketplace?
Yeah, if people in small boats want to come across, they should come across.
But don't you?
They should have the freedom to come across.
So you're not, but it's. You accept though, don't you, that they don't actually want to go on the boats. The boats are not fun for them. They're going on the boats because there are no safe and legal alternatives to them. Would you support would you support having safe and legal alternatives to them to come here?
Well, if I had my ideal world, I'd allow them to come on the ferry or on the plane from Gatwick. But given that is not going to be the case, I support the illegal means through which they're coming, namely the small boats.
Surely we're saying that. Well, I mean, one thing I probably would agree with you on is that. You can make, when we talk about, and people ridicule me for saying this, but it's actually, I think it's a completely legitimate point. The reason we talk about something being illegal is that we have specifically made it illegal. I'm not saying that you should make boat crossings legal, but you can have legal ways for people to come here, so they don't then have to use illegal ways.
From Hong Kong, for example, from Ukraine, there are safe and legal routes, and the left often says there are 9 of them.
There are very, very few.
There are 9 of them.
I suppose Jonathan would want more liberal policy.
How are there 9? What are the 9?
I will Google it for you during the break.
Okay. There's Hong Kong, which is, we know that's fine. There's Ukraine. I think that's still in operation, and we can talk about why Ukraine exists and the other one doesn't. There was one for Syria, which I think has been wrapped up. There was...
But the thing is, there are safe and legal routes. They do exist.
But there were safe legal routes for some people, and there was one for Afghanistan, which actually very few people took up. But it's not as though everyone in Afghanistan was able to take up that scheme. Very few people actually followed that scheme.
But often,
and if you're fleeing Sudan, for example, there is actually no legal route for you to
and I'm not blaming you for this, Jonathan, because you've made some pretty reasonable points, some of which I disagree with on that. But there are people on the left, some of them, who say there are no safe and legal routes, and that is incorrect. George has been in touch and says, I thought the attraction for migrants coming to the UK was because they understood English. Am I missing something? Well, some do, some don't. Tom in Bletchley says, regarding NHS translators, unless under 18 or over 60, you cannot get a resident visa for the UK unless you pass an English test. So parents of under 18 years old and children of parents over 60 can act as translators. What is going on? Another thing illegals are getting away with, says Tom. Kaz in Staffordshire says, there's nothing great for us Brits in Great Britain. This country has let their own people down big time. This hospital story is shocking. Learn English for goodness sake, then get in your proper place in the queue. David says, irrespective of whether they've got family members or friends, they should supply their own interpreter. It's not our taxes that should pay for them. Sounds like the other way. Another way the NHS can let me just finish what he's saying. Sounds like another way the NHS can waste them. Yes, Jonathan.
Okay, so for example, if one of those people that just messaged in were to go on holiday to Spain or Italy, for example, and didn't have fluent Spanish or Italian and needed to use a hospital there, and the doctor there didn't speak English, what would we expect those people to do? If an interpreting service was offered, a translation service was offered to any of us going in that situation, would we refuse it on the grounds that we were foreigners in that country and we didn't speak their language, or would we accept that service as part of a system that offers public services, important, urgent public goods?
He could ask for the bill for the translation services, and that way he'd be picking up his own tab and not burdening the Spanish taxpayer.
I think very few people would volunteer to do that.
Very few people would volunteer to do it, but if the caller wanted to be consistent, that's what he'd say.
Okay.
Mary in County Down has been in touch and says, here's a bigger question. Why are we granting citizenship to people who haven't achieved a decent level of English? Many of the patients requiring interpreters are long-time residents who have barely learned to speak the language. Maybe a review needed to place an obligation on those applying for citizenship or leave to remain to pass a decent standard of English test. Well, some of those do exist at various points, as has been pointed out there. Andy says, well, that's a surprise. All the lefties say migrants come to the UK because they speak English. They can't speak English when they go to a hospital, but I bet they can when they call the Department of Work and Pension for benefits. Stephen in London says, at every election we are told the NHS would not be here now if it wasn't for immigrant doctors and nurses from all over the world working in the system. So why do we need interpreters? Well, maybe the doctors are doing other things. Maybe they're not in the right place. We've got a voice note from Mike in Durham. This is what he has to say.
You don't need interpreters in hospitals. I carry a device which works with your phone and has many languages. And you've seen it on the police programmes where they just ring somebody up and the interpreter's there. You do not need anybody there physically.
I think Mike's right in that AI is actually going to take over interpretation in a short period of time, although it does have to be precise, especially when you've got very complex medical terms and when you're trying to, of course, translate, even within English, translate a complex medical procedure down to words that people understand. I know my doctor doesn't use the big medical words, just tells me sort of, right, you know, this is wrong, this has to be fixed in this way, and that's a skill that doctors often have. Some of them do, some of them don't. And finally, before the break, Ian says we have to stop trying to cure the world with our NHS. This is madness.
Moving from, and I get that people are frustrated, in particular the circumstances that we're in. Yeah. But donations for gifts and hospitality and, you know, monetary donations have been a feature of our politics for a very long time. People can look it up and can see what people have had donations for, and the transparency is really important.
But you're saying to people, basically, suck this up, we're going to carry on doing it because it's been like this forever.
I'm not saying that. I get that people are angry, and I get that people are upset.
But you're not going to change the rules.
I think that the transparency is there so people can see that. Now, if there is a national debate about how we fund politics and how we do that, that's another, and I hear that people are frustrated with that, but we have a system at the moment that says if you get donations, that has to be declared and the rules have to apply to everybody. And I think that is correct so that people can see where you've had donations and where that potential influence is so that people can see the transparency.
Angela Rayner there, the Deputy Prime Minister, referring to not just a freebie holiday she got from Lord Ali, staying in an apartment in New York with her friend Sam Parry, who was at that stage an MP. Tarry, he didn't declare it. It's really interesting what she talks about transparency there, because Rachel Reeves, for example, got £7,500 worth of clothes. She declared that, they got them from Lord Ali, she declared that, yeah, she put it down, and she said they were to support her office. She didn't say they were clothes, she said they were support for her office. Then she took further advice and then declared that they were closed. So the transparency wasn't there from the start. That is a fact. Let's talk to Charles and Jonathan about this. This isn't going away, Charles.
That's right. But they've done nothing illegal as far as I'm aware, and where they've got things wrong, as Reeves has, as you've just mentioned, she's corrected it. I think Starmer's right to say when it comes to the football stadium boxes that they sit in, that it's better that he accept that gift and go in there and it be very nice than him go in the stalls and expect the taxpayer to pick up the bill. Now,
so just on that, just to get clarity in all of this, what's happening on the front of the Mail on Sunday was a corporate box that Starmer and Lammy and Sue Gray went to. With the Arsenal matter, there's been more information actually come out in the Sunday Times.
Okay.
Tim Shipman's been writing about this today. And what's happened is Starmer has paid for 2 season tickets for him and his son. Arsenal have said, right, we can't have you for security reasons in the same seats every time, which season tickets holders usually have. We've got to move you around to available seats. But actually, they've moved him into a corporate box. There are just 2 seats in that corporate box. There is a difference of a few £100 in that. Starmer has paid that. That, to me, is fine. I have no issue with that. And actually, if Downing Street had put that information in the public domain a few days ago, we'd be talking about other things, Charles. And I find the handling of this has been pretty bad, actually.
I'm willing to accept the PR has been bad. I just don't see the substance of the issue as being bad really at all, especially if the alternative to private donations is state finance of political parties, which I'd definitely be opposed to, and this, the type of thing that Angela Rayner would back. And perhaps you?
No, I think that's you've kind of hit the nail on the head. Actually, if the Mail et al. Really want to pick at this thread, then let's have a conversation.
Well, there were articles yesterday in the Mirror and the Guardian about this as well. Right. So this is not just the right-wing media.
No, but if the Mail and we know what this is really. This is a concerted. The right-wing media is trying to find something they can get some momentum on.
So why is the left-wing media covering it as well then? If it's not a story, Wardrobe Gate is a major story.
I'm not saying it's not a story. I think it's been overblown, frankly. I'm not saying they haven't done things wrong. And I think there is a broader political point about a kind of complacency that has taken root. I can't remember if we were talking about this before, but there seemed to be, obviously we know there was a Ming Va strategy, famously, before the election where the Labour didn't want to upset anyone or get anything wrong, and there was just this incredible anxiety. And it almost seems like they've gone to the other extreme now, and they're kind of willing to break things and upset people needlessly, almost defying the polls. So, sort of scorning popularity, courting on popularity.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer's personal popularity down 26 points.
I've written a column about it. My Byline Times column this month is about this very issue. People want to buy that and read it. So this is what they have to worry about. I'm not saying there's no issue at all, but clearly there's an agenda here. I don't think that Angela Rayner taking her boyfriend on holiday is any kind of headline news. I think it's really silly, and I think
well, it is news, and the reason it's news is had she gone and had he as an MP, as he then was, he's not anymore, but had he as an MP declared that, it wouldn't have been news. It would have been definitely.
That's for him then, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but she's involved as well because she went on the holiday as well. It was £2,500. She declared it, but I mean, it's a story because he didn't declare it, and now she's been asked to comment on it. I mean, she's involved. It's perfectly reasonable for Laura Koonsberg or any other interviewer to ask Angela Rayner about that.
I don't see why it's her business what Sam Tarry declared or not. Yeah, as far as she was concerned, and I can understand this. As she saw it, she was staying in a friend's empty apartment in New York.
Yes,
and many
which was
people,
a donation of £2,500.
Right, and that was declared. and it was declared. So there's no... I don't see
are you saying that interviewers should not be asking Angela Rayner about that at all?
Interviewers can ask whatever they want. I just don't think it's a political story, and I don't think that we need to... Look, there are going to be a lot of things...
You mean it shouldn't be a story? It is a story, but it shouldn't be a story.
It doesn't... I think of interviewers, as I say, they can ask
She's
whatever...
the Deputy Prime Minister. She received a donation. We should be able to question her about that.
Right, and she has declared it in the normal way.
Yes,
and
but another person who was there didn't declare it, therefore it's a story.
Who is not the Deputy Prime Minister. So
he is an MP, or he was an MP.
And he's not an MP anymore.
Well, he was a Labour MP, and that's why, and he didn't declare it, and it's Labour. It is a story, Jonathan.
The fact that we're sort of quibbling about these details suggests to me, illustrates the fact that this is not actually a major story.
It's a massive story. It is a massive story.
There are going to be a lot of scandals in the next 5 years, as there are under all governments. I hope there won't be that many, but there will be real things the government gets wrong, and I'll be here to talk about them, believe you me. But I don't think this is high on the list of major misdeeds.
Charles?
I'm no great fan of this government. I would agree with Jonathan. I don't really think this is that important.
OK.
But insofar as it damages the Labour Party, I'm all in favour of the Daily Mail writing about it.
Benny is in Belfast and says the Chancellor's economy with the facts over her clothes donation is worrying and disappointing. Donation to support her office gives the impression that it was for photocopiers and printers or a salary for a researcher, not clothes for her alone to wear. Keith in Oa Street says, I don't think I've heard anything so idiotic on your show as someone saying he agrees with the illegal immigrants coming without any checks. The authorities have said that they are terrorists amongst them. What an idiot. Charles?
I don't think I am an idiot. There's lots of people that go from urban areas to rural areas, and urban areas have higher rates of crime in this country than rural areas, and we don't require internal border controls there and checks on whether or not these urban people who could come to the countryside are criminal. Neither do I think that economic migrants in the Channel, should be checked when they're coming to the UK.
Charles clarifying there that he doesn't think I'm an idiot. I also don't think Charles is an idiot, just to clarify. Jonathan, do you think Charles is an idiot?
No, I don't. But I tell you what I'm absolutely thrilled about, that's to have someone else on the panel being abused.
Usually Jonathan Liss has a few choice comments.
I can't believe I've been outflanked on immigration. That was not on my bingo card for this channel ever.
I didn't think it would be.
Well, listen, we're going to talk about other things in just a second. We'll talk about the winter fuel allowance. We'll talk about Mohammed Al-Fayed as well. Stay with us here on Talk.
We're keen to have disabled people.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about somebody with a dodgy leg. I'm talking about somebody whose difficulties are so insurmountable that it would be cruel to continue. Medically, ethically, through years of research into this area and the amazing medical capabilities that we have, that can be established at often a very early stage of pregnancy, that this is not a child that is likely, possibly it won't go full term anyway, but even if the baby did, the life will be so miserable and challenging and possibly uncomfortable and painful that a decision to terminate that pregnancy is the kinder, more advanced thing to do. Can you not get your head around that at all, Stephen?
It is said hard cases make bad law. And what you do is exactly the same as euthanasia in Canada and in the Netherlands. You bring in that law, and all of a sudden you're aborting people because they have a hair lip.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Lots of people getting in touch, including one texter who says the woman with her hand on the country's financial tiller needs to be clean, clear and trustworthy on Rachel Reeves. Another person says, speaking to an Iraqi barber recently, here in the UK for 2 years, excellent English, he had almost no English when he arrived. A nurse friend was recently dealing with a patient living in the UK for 38 years. Not a word of English and huge problems trying to diagnose and treat her, waiting for family members to translate, some of whom UK born, also appear to struggle with English. Her son said they never speak English at home or amongst friends. People coming here have to want to speak English and integrate more fully. The Iraqi barber is desperate to get a better job and to get to university. Very ambitious, has joined a football club to make more local friends and so on. So really interesting perspectives there. Keep them coming in, 0344 499 1000 for calls. We'll take some of those in a minute. You can also text me, 87222, or send me a WhatsApp message on that main number, or a voice note, also on the main number, 0344 499 1000. Jonathan Less and Charles Amos, political commentators, both are still with me. I want to talk about Sharon Graham now. She is the boss of Unite, and she has stepped up calls on Keir Starmer to reverse the announcement of the winter fuel allowance cut for 10 million people. Going to get Charles and Jonathan's thoughts on that in a second, but let's just see what Sharon Graham has been telling Sky News this morning.
Well, look, I think the priority that I'd like to hear from him is that he's going to reverse the decision on the winter fuel allowance. It's a cruel policy. He needs to reverse it, and I'd like him to say that he's made a misstep and to reverse that policy. I'd also like him to say that we're not going to take this country down austerity Mark II. People voted for change. They need to see change, and he needs to reverse the winter fuel allowance and let people have that £300 they can put their heating on this winter.
Charles, your reaction?
Well, I think it's a great shame that you have these Labour associates suggesting they shouldn't put the public finances back on a sound footing. I'm all in favour of abolishing the winter fuel allowance. Pensioners don't need this money, as I've said before.
Many of them do.
They spend 17% of their income, the bottom quintile of pensioners, on tobacco, alcohol, hotels, restaurants, recreation and culture.
I think you'll find there are a lot of pensioners who don't spend money on those things and actually are going to be struggling to keep their heating on this winter.
And the very, very, very poorest will continue to receive the winter fuel allowance because they will be on pension credit.
But you would scrap the whole thing, though, wouldn't you? I
would scrap the whole thing. Pension credit, winter fuel allowance, housing benefit, child tax credits, the whole welfare state I'd scrapped. But if we're just talking about the winter fuel allowance, pensioners don't need it. They don't deserve it. They certainly haven't paid in all of their lives on a net analysis, so they can't say, I deserve to get out the winter fuel allowance, because they haven't paid in enough to warrant it. So I'm all in favour of the Labour Party's policy on this. I never thought I'd be saying that and sitting in this chair and saying it. So it's a great shame that people are opposing that are associated with the Labour Party.
Well, so you're on the right and you're supporting the Labour policy, and I'm on the left and I'm attacking it. What a crazy topsy-turvy one. I mean, you really are a libertarian, my goodness.
What do you make of what Charles has said?
Well, you might be surprised to learn, Peter, that I'm against it. I'm against the idea of abolishing the welfare state, as you may well have surmised. And I think that Graham is right on this point. This was a misstep. It was a completely pointless argument that Rachel Reeves decided to have. She didn't even announce it in the budget when she could have announced other sweeteners to go. And this kind of speaks to what I was saying a moment ago about the complacency. The Labour he's not only paying no attention to the polls and popularity, but actively scorning them, challenging them. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. That is not a long-term viable strategy.
Well,
to have
actually, in the long term, a lot of politicians would say, when you have a huge majority, when you have a big mandate, when you have the situation where you're 4.5 years away from an election, now is the time to make the really tough decisions.
Make the tough decisions that are worthwhile. This won't even, the money saved won't even touch the sides.
Why is this a bad decision? You've just assumed it's a bad decision. Why is it a bad decision?
I haven't assumed it's a bad decision.
Well,
I've made
you have.
Well, no, you don't know that I've assumed it. This is my job, and I've kind of reasoned that it's a bad decision for all kinds of reasons, moral and political.
Oh, yeah, but in this interview, you've assumed it's a bad decision.
Yes.
You have reasons for that,
Yes.
but you've assumed. Why is it a bad decision?
Okay, well, I think it's a bad decision because it has not been fairly done. Look, I agree with you.
How's that unfair?
I'm about to tell you. There are many pensioners, I agree, very wealthy pensioners who don't need the money. There are far better ways to if you thought that this is a political priority, which I didn't, because they didn't need to pick a fight with any pensioners, then, for example, you could have had a system where pensioners who pay, for example, the top rate of income tax, who are obviously going to be quite comfortable by definition, would be exempt from receiving this benefit. That would have been, I don't think anyone would have complained about it. They might have said, why are you taking this slightly random fight? But fine, if that's an argument that you want to have, you can have that argument. But we know there are so many pensioners who really don't earn a lot of money, who are going to be affected by this, and they're saying, I'm going to suffer. It's not just the stereotype of wealthy pensioners.
Because they want their £200. As I've said, the bottom quintile of pensioners spend 17% of their income on leisure spending. All they'd need to do is cut their leisure spending by 10% in order to make up for that.
I don't think that's I don't think that people should just be required to exist in misery in their lives. I think that people should be entitled to some pleasures and luxuries, actually.
Taxpayers should be forced to pay for other people's luxuries, going to hotels and going to restaurants and things like that.
It's entirely...
They're not paying for that. They're paying for money for winter fuel.
Yeah, which can go... No, they're not paying for money for winter fuel. The £200 is just, here is £200. And if you want to spend it on winter fuel, you can. And if you want to spend it on something else, as a number of pensioners do,
there are a number of people, Charles, on a very perilous and low income who see that money as... I'm not talking about the people who are millionaires who own, huge houses or can look about that. But there are 2 million people that Age UK says will go hungry and will be very cold this winter without that winter fuel allowance.
I don't believe them. As I've said, the bottom quintile of pensioners spend 17% of their income on leisure. And that bottom quintile figure, because it's an average, is referring really to the 10th percentile. The 10th
Where are you
percentile
getting that figure from, out of interest?
From the Office for National Statistics Family Spending Workbook, the 2024 edition. I've updated my figures since I came on the show last time.
I mean, I just don't understand. I think that, you have to listen to a charity like Age UK and pensioners themselves. I have no reason to doubt that many people who are sort of talking to journalists, dialing into shows, etc., to say that they need that money in order to stay warm, and they are sort of in tears on the radio talking about whether they are going to be able to heat or cook food. And I don't think that we should have a system where people are just required to live in total penury.
I want to let Charles come back on that, but we're running out of time. And if you just sit where you are for 3 minutes, I promise I'll let Charles come back on that and continue the debate just for a couple more minutes, because when things run over, we do actually need to let it breathe a little bit. We'll talk to John Rentoul. I'm sure he can wait a couple of minutes. We're going to have the news now. We'll get your comments as well, and Charles's response to what Jonathan is saying in just a second here on Talk, and you can get your call in too in the break.
On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, a very good morning. It's Talk. This is Peter Cardwell. I'm here with Charles Amos and Jonathan Less. We're going to continue the discussion. Usually the panel is just up until 11 o'clock, as you may know, but we're going to continue this discussion because we've had a lot of reaction to what Charles is saying about the winter fuel allowance here. Let me just read out a couple of messages. Michelle says, I've never seen anyone as worrying as Charles on any interview anywhere up until now. A deeply troubling individual and a pure globalist, a very cruel man. I'll let Charles respond to these things, of course. David says, we're going to have a party party to keep warm with loads of booze and fags. I've got to spend my 17%, which I've been saving all year, to pay the bills. Frankie says, Mr. Amos sounds as if he wants workhouses back. What a disgraceful man. You need to remove Charles from the airwaves. Leslie calls you disgusting. I'm all for free speech, but is insulting the majority of pensioners. Charles, what do you make of the strong reaction that you've had?
I think it's unfortunate, because it would be better if they agreed with me. But to the point of substance, many wealthy pensioners have paid in to the pension system all of their lives. They've foregone holidays, they've foregone restaurant meals, they've foregone new clothes. Those wealthy pensioners should not be forced via the tax system to pay for those people who have not saved a penny throughout their whole lives to finance them to have holidays, for them to have restaurant meals, for them to have new clothes. That is a grave injustice. If you've paid £1 into the state, you should get that £1 out. And the winter fuel allowance is simply a means of redistributing income from those who have been prudent, from those who have done the right thing, to those who are not prudent, to those who have
It's not about being
never
prudent, though,
saved
necessarily.
in their lives.
There is a, maybe you can't save, maybe you don't have enough money to save, maybe you don't earn enough
It
money.
sounds like punishing people for being poor, or saying that poverty is a moral failing.
Well, poverty in some cases, in many cases, is the fault of the people in that position. I think we should go back to the Victorian. We should go back to the Victorian idea of the deserving and the undeserving poor. I would encourage everybody. I would encourage everybody to read.
What are the undeserving
Samuel
poor?
Smiles.
Wow.
Okay,
Self-help.
What are
the
the
undeserving poor are those people who get to a very old age or into a very unfortunate position due to their own fault, due to not saving, due to being prolific when they are young, due to those things.
Jonathan.
I mean, it's actually really refreshing to be with someone like Charles, because he says the quiet part out loud quite openly. Because I, as a left commentator, have been talking about how Conservative and some Labour politicians have really been talking about the deserving and undeserving poor in this Victorian style without ever having the guts to say so. And I think it's actually quite refreshing when someone is prepared to say, yes, there are deserving poor and undeserving poor. I completely disagree with that, of course, but I think it's important. People should. No, I think that people should. I think that there are a number of reasons why people are poor, and it's not for me to judge people or to say you don't deserve to have a basic standard of living. And I do support redistribution. I'm on the left. But I do think it's... I kind of have found this session quite funny, Peter, in a sense, because I'm normally the villain of the piece.
Read the text.
So Simon Evans tweeted to say, have you tried turning Charles Amos off and back on again? He appears to be malfunctioning as he's making Jonathan Lift sound reasonable. Thank you for that.
On a more serious note, someone has messaged in and says, would Charles agree that we shouldn't continue to pay the royal family?
Yes.
Would you abolish the monarchy?
I would abolish the monarchy.
OK, wow. OK.
He's consistent.
I'm a classical liberal, and liberals believe that government should rest on the consent of the people, not on the divine right of the king.
I don't think classical liberals were Republicans, didn't they?
If you look at the classical liberals of the 1640s, the Levers, John Lillyburn...
In the 17th century, maybe. It was quite a different... I think Charles I was a slightly different king from Charles III.
OK, I think we should probably leave it. I think we should probably leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed.